And now on the line is Paul O'Brien, the CEO of Plan Ireland. Paul, welcome back to New FM.
Thank you, Darren.
Uh,
Great to be
Pa-
back.
okay, cool. Paul, I interviewed your colleague in Plan Ireland, Dulce Rockney, in late June on this programme on New FM, and we discussed the hunger crisis in the Horn of Africa. Paul, can you tell me about your experience in general of what is going on there?
Well, I suppose as you interviewed Dulce going back, this is something we have been monitoring for the last while. The situation has continued to deteriorate, mainly because there's been no rain really in a lot of the regions for the last sort of 4 years. And pastoralist communities in particular, and these are people who, if you want to say, are like nomadic. They have animals and they literally live off of those animals. So they may kill, they may also use the milk and blood, and they may also maybe sell every now and then. But they've had for centuries a very viable way of making a living by moving from one area to another where there is pasture and with their herds. But we're seeing that they in particular are really devastated with the ongoing drought that has been going on for the last few years. They themselves told me, I was actually out there about less than a month ago, and they kind of used the words climate change, which, Darren, to be honest, is the first time I've ever heard, if you want to say, ordinary people or nomadic people using such words. Generally, I've heard the words climate change being used by experts, if you want to say, or kind of people like in my own sort of profession as like an NGO worker, or sometimes kind of government people. But these were very ordinary people saying that they could see a change in pattern in the weather over the last 30, 35 years, where a few years, 30 years ago, they would have said there was maybe 4 years of really okay rains and maybe 1 year of bad rains, and they could survive that. Whereas now what's happened is they're getting 4 years of very bad rain and maybe 1 year of good rain, and they just cannot survive kind of that long. And that's really, the numbers are just, honestly, are just staggering. We're talking about 22 million people in that region affected. And about 250,000 under 5 children affected as well.
Okay. Yeah, you're saying that you were there you were in Somaliland last month. I saw Caoimhe Damara from Trócaire on Virgin Media Television a couple of days ago, and I hope to interview Caoimhe next week along with yourself today on the same topic as Squaga with her maybe. And I read the article earlier this week in the Irish Times by Colin Brophy, the Minister for Overseas Development Aid. According to Caoimhe, on Virgin Media Television, she said that people are already dying of hunger in the Horn of Africa. That's your experience also, is it?
That's my experience as well. Yeah, like Darren, it may sound very depressing to say this, but we think in some ways we're already too late. We have been highlighting this for going back over the last sort of year, but we haven't had the level of response from what we refer to as the international community to be able to prevent this. Like we haven't seen the level of funding or resources to be able to stop this from happening. And that's our big frustration, is I think the attention that Ukraine has drawn has taken people's, some ways the media and politics away completely from this situation in the Horn of Africa and across other countries in Africa as well. And so what we're actually seeing, is particularly children, young children dying at this stage, because young children need very specialized sort of food. They need food which is high in protein, and there just isn't that food available for their families to be able to access. And they are the ones mostly that are dying at this stage.
And we're looking at the worst famine in decades, are we?
We think so, because the scale that this is at, and also let me be honest as well, in a place like Somalia, the access to the affected populations is quite challenging, in that there's jihadist group known as Al-Shabaab are controlling quite a lot of the area which is affected. And so those affected are having to come out of that area rather than aid workers being able to get in for the most part. And that's where we're seeing also a kind of lot of people dying on the road, literally as they're walking to leave that area to come to camps which are in safer areas which non-government organizations have access to, where they can deliver assistance. That's where a kind of a big part of this is happening as well.
Okay, I think we hear a lot in the Irish and European media about climate change, and people saying that if as a planet we don't get on top of it by 2030, that the world temperature will rise by 2 degrees Celsius. But am I right in saying, Paul, that 2 degrees Celsius is only an average, and that in many places like the Horn of Africa, they are already experiencing an even higher rise in temperature than 2 degrees?
I don't know the technical degrees in terms of temperatures, Darren, to be honest, but all I can tell you is the experience that local people have on the ground, that they are saying to us that they have never seen a drought as severe and as intensive for so long. And like even one of the things that we do on the ground there is actually try and provide water into villages, because the water table or the water level is so deep, you just cannot believe it, because of it's been so dry for so many years. So, here in Ireland, we had a great summer and a lot of the parks and everything looked quite brown. And within literally a week of rain, it's turned green again. Whereas in these areas, like the water table would be actually only a few meters below the ground in Ireland. Whereas in Somalia, what I was told by people was that they would have to have wells or the machines capable of digging up to 350 meters. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I know is from experience of living and working in some of these dry climates, that's really challenging in terms of the cost to do such well and the cost to be able to maintain such a deep borehole for people to be able to access water. And sometimes, and again, I know this from experience, if you dig those wells, the water could actually be salty. So what we're having to do in many areas is literally truck water into villages and keep them going, keep the villagers going themselves in terms of drinking water, and with the few animals that they have left so that they have drinking water in that as well. And with the spread of villages the way they are, we're able to get around in the areas where we're working, we're able to get around twice a week. And I was there when that water was being delivered, and it's just quite incredible to see the scenes as a truck comes in and pours water into a specifically constructed kind of literally hole, and people then drawing it out with buckets and that as quick as it's going in. We have no real sense of what drought is about and what it's like to be hungry or thirsty in any sort of sense of the word. So this is climate change kicking in now, and like as we think is that we've seen a kind of a change, a fairly radical change in the last few years in terms of people's ability to be able to cope in some of these areas. That nomadic lifestyle, I would think, is probably changed forever. They will never be able to go back to the times when they had herds roaming around literally freely and being able to live, huge numbers of people being able to live off those herds. Now those people are what we call internally displaced. They're living on the edges of towns. And I met a whole load of these people, and they're very, very vulnerable, because if you think about it, Darren, if you were used to doing one way of life and now you've lost that way of life and you have no other means of making a living, that is really, really challenging for huge numbers of people with their children, and them trying to kind of adjust and literally try to do maybe get small jobs on a daily basis to try and get enough money to buy enough food for that day. It's quite harrowing, to be honest.
Yeah, it sounds like devastating what's going on. And just to bring her up again, I already mentioned her, but Quiva Dabara, I saw a tweet from her on Twitter a few days ago. She said that even in a lot of the camps that like the NGOs, I'm not sure if you have one, but like camps that NGOs have, like there are a lot of kids who are malnourished, and even when they get to the camps and get nutrition or food, they're still dying a lot of the times. Does that happen? Yeah.
That happens because, talking again sort of technically around children, if they have not received the right nutrition, literally from the day of conception right up to what we refer to as 1,000 days, which is, it's taking almost like from conception right through to their first 2 years of life. If a child is not getting the right nutrition at that age, then the child is physically not developing, but is also cognitively not developing in the same way. So, and that's something that can never be regained. So we talk in our language of things like of stunting, and basically you see children that should be, let's say, 2 foot tall, and they're only 1 foot 5 or 6 inches. So they're already kind of small for their age in terms of their height. But it's also kind of that longer term impact in terms of their cognitive development. So if they're going to school, they're just not able to learn in the same way, and it has impaired them literally for life. And that's why we place so much emphasis on under 5 nutrition. So what Quiva was probably seeing was kids that come in and they're so far gone that it's actually impossible to bring them back. And generally, we go in there with very specialized foods, high in protein. We use a kind of a peanut-based food, which is very specific for children who are literally starving. And we get the mothers to be able to give them that. But first, they have to be stabilized, which may seem strange. You can't just pump high protein food into kids the minute they arrive, because their whole body in some ways is beginning to break down. So you have to just make sure the whole electrolytes and things like that are actually stabilized before you can actually get back to giving them the levels of nutrition that they need. And that stabilization bit is extremely important in a nutrition response. It can take sometimes, 2.5 days, maybe 3 days. But once you get that, you can start bringing them back. But if you don't get it, then inevitably the children are dying.
Yeah, I always wondered about that. I've never been even in Africa, but never mind a camp in Africa where they help people that are starving. So we're facing the worst famine in decades, and 22 million people could die. That's the reality, is it?
That's the reality. That there's 22 million people in great danger at the moment. And while we're seeing some sort of resources being devoted towards it, we're seeing some stabilization in the supply starting to come out of Ukraine. Because if you go back to 3-4 weeks ago, we were talking about how the ships were being held in, I think it was Odessa, and the supply hadn't kind of started again. That has started again, but again, it's probably, we feel, a little bit too late for a lot of those regions, because there's quite a few of those regions that are dependent for their food supply on imports. And with the situation in Ukraine and Russia, the price of grain has kind of gone through the roof for a lot of families. So, Darren, I often try to explain to people, sometimes it's not necessarily that there's no food available at all, but in many cases there may be food available, but the price of it is just out of people's reach. And that can seem very strange to us here in Ireland, but that's what's actually happening as well. So there's 2 issues. One is there food available at all on the local market? And then secondly, well, if there is food available, is it accessible in terms of for price for people to be able to, do they have the money or whatever to pay for it? And often that second bit of it is not there, that people just don't have any money. They're so poor their resources are so depleted that they don't have any means of paying for food. And that's the reality that quite a number of people are facing at the moment, is just that access to food.
And I know we hear about it every day in the media, but I know in the Western world, like Europe and America, we have huge inflation now. And is there inflation in Africa as well? Do you know?
There is inflation, and it's this very same issue, but it's that war in Ukraine has really kind of kicked in. But you also have to remember, Darren, and it's interesting, 6 months ago, if we were talking, or 12 months ago, we'd be mentioning this other C word, which is COVID. And in a lot of countries in Africa, COVID had a sort of a very interesting impact. Now, some people would have said, listen, it's one of quite a number of things that people in different poorer communities in Africa would have been facing, including things like malaria, including kind of water diseases from water which is not clean. So in one sense, COVID was just one additional thing that a lot of poorer people would find very, very challenging in their lives anyway. But that had a bit of a knock-on effect in terms of work for people, in terms of the movement of people, that normally you could see people maybe migrating for work, but because of COVID they couldn't. And in some cases then, if they were available for work, people were reluctant to hire them because they were told that they shouldn't have gatherings of people in their home or homestead and that as well. So this has come on, you've referred to climate change, which is right, but you've also had it on the back of COVID. And while, we talk about having recovered from COVID here, and you don't hear so much about it or even see so much about it now, in other countries, that knock-on impact of COVID is still there, and it's still having an impact.
Yeah, okay. In our last interview, you spoke about the three C's. We've discussed two of them: climate change, COVID, and there's also conflict, and that's happening in some parts of Somalia, as you mentioned as well, isn't it?
That is, yeah, that's one of the issues that is also kind of exacerbating the situation particularly in South Central Somalia. But where I had visited up in the north, it was pretty safe. I was able to get out and visit villages and see what was happening on the ground. And, in South Central, it's an awful lot more dangerous to be doing that. And I suppose this is one of the ironies, and we've seen this. I suppose we could look at, again, Ukraine and Russia, and you say once you get conflict disrupting things, it really disrupts everything, particularly in terms of the flow of food. I suppose if we look in our supermarkets at where food, particularly maybe vegetables and fruit and other things, is coming from, in many cases they're coming from some countries in Africa. So the whole importance of that global food system, how everything is sort of linked. We talk about logistics and getting supplies of one thing or another from different places. And the knock-on impact of Ukraine has been felt right across the globe, but very much in poorer countries in Africa, particularly these places that have been suffering from drought, because they were having to import food. And when that supply was drying up, and even the supply that was available, the price had escalated hugely, then their ability to be able to purchase food on the local market was severely hampered. And they just can't do it in many cases.
Okay, Paul, to come towards the end of our interview today, is there anything else you want to tell me that we maybe haven't covered about what's going on in the Horn of Africa? And can you tell our listeners on Near FM how, you probably get this question a lot, but how we can help?
I suppose, in terms of how people can help, I suppose, we're aid agencies, we're always looking for the resources, and that's money. And a lot of what we do is maybe supply water, and it costs us around €200 to fill a water truck and to be able to deliver it to villages. But we also put money into people's hands and that as well, so that they themselves can buy the food on the local market. Here we might call it dole, but we do the very same in these situations, so that essentially you're giving people money to be able to go and buy food themselves. And it gives them, if you want to say, you're kind of empowering them to go and make the choices that they want themselves in terms of what they will buy and what they will use the money for. So if people want to assist, the plan is www.plan.ie, and you will see that we have a water trucking appeal out at the moment. But also, and Cuiva is with Trócaire and Plan International Ireland and 5 other agencies are part of what we call the Irish Emergency Alliance. And again, if people want to donate to a kind of a group of organisations working together in Ireland to raise money from the public, so that there's not 7 different appeals going out from each organisation, so that we're being much more efficient in how we go about raising our money. And that's the Irish Emergency Alliance.ie. If people want to donate through that as well, it would be hugely appreciated.